It's showing Ian, not me, as the host. How do I get shown as the host? Oh. Okay, it's not showing me as the host. I've got to change. What's that little one? It says recording. I'll go back to gallery view maybe. Yeah, I'll just have to go on gallery view. There we go. I'll just have to do it on that. Does that matter? It doesn't matter. I'll just do it on that. Okay, Facebook Live. Would you mind checking on the Class Conscious Facebook page if the live stream's working? It seems to be working. Okay, so the meeting is live on Facebook now. Okay, I guess we'll make a start. Firstly, hello. Yep, my name is Davey Heller. I'm from Class Conscious, a website based in America and Australia. Just like to say hello to all the comrades participating in the meeting and also watching on Facebook. Welcome to the panel, Marxists Speak Out on the Conflict Between Russia and Imperialism. There are clearly defining moments in human history and the class struggle. Russia's invasion of Ukraine is one of them. Today's panel brings together Marxist groups from around the world who are taking a principled anti-imperialist position and offering critical support to Russia's military action. We stand united around the banner that nations in the crosshairs of imperialism have the right to defend themselves. The panel was initiated by classconscious.org website and Liga Comunista Party of Brazil. We felt there was an urgent need to promote cooperation between the groups taking this stand. And despite the call out being only put out a little over a week ago, today's panel is joined by Marxists from many countries. To clarify at the outset, this is not an international fusion conference or congress, but a discussion for groups that have a close and minority political position amongst Marxists on the war in Ukraine. Speaking today are representatives of the Liaison Committee for the Fourth International, with its, on behalf of its sections, the Liga Comunista from Brazil, the Consistent Democrats of the UK, the Socialist Workers League of the US, Tendencia Militant Bolshevik of Argentina, Class Conscious website, the Bolshevik Tendency, Communist Revolutionary Action, or KED, from Greece, the Socialist Unity Party of the United States, and Socialist Flight in the UK. Attending and supporting the meeting, but not speaking, is the Bolshevik group from South Korea, and attending as observers is the Revolutionary Workers' Party, or DIP, of Turkey. Special thanks to the comrades who are joining us either very early in the morning or late at night in their countries. We hope to finish the forum within about 90 minutes, with each speaker being given about 10 minutes each. There will hopefully be the opportunity for some shorter comments and closing remarks from the main speakers at the end. The meeting is being live streamed from classconscious.org Facebook page and will be uploaded later today on the Liga Comunista YouTube channel. All right, so I think we'll start by introducing our first speaker, which is Ian from the Liaison Committee for the Fourth International. Thanks, Ian.
Thank you. Yes, I'm speaking for the LCFI and for the Consistent Democrats in Britain. By way of introduction, recently I was confronted by a typical NATO leftist apologist who actually expressed the view that in seeking the disbandment of Russia, NATO was seeking to destroy something terrible, which he called the Russian Empire. And I was just thinking, well, he asked the question, what Russian Empire? I mean, the Russian Empire was smashed in 1917 and its monarch, the Tsar, was put against the wall. The US and Britain and every imperialist around the world invaded Russia and fought to restore capitalism in the empire. And that was the way the Russian worker state was born. If you fast forward to 1981 and after, when the worker state was destroyed, they were happy about Yeltsin. The imperialists were happy about Yeltsin, and even initially about Putin, when they were convinced that they were doing the job for them. But their sheer world predatory behaviour, extending NATO to the east, gradually caused a rift. And much of the Soviet oligarchy began to back away from neoliberalism through a process of polarisation, which actually is continuing to this day. And they use the technological and military power that survived from the USSR increasingly to keep imperialism at bay. And that's what this new Cold War is about. They've still not eliminated every trace of what grew out of 1917 and the other social revolutions derived from it. It's more obvious with China because the regime still clings on to elements of its own ideology, its old ideology. But the issues are related. This imperialist Cold War, in our view, is still directed against some remnants or residues of 1917. As with feudalism, after the defeat of Napoleon in the early 19th century and the restoration of Louis XVIII in France, just as with that, restoring capitalism after it's been torn out by the roots and crushed for decades has proved a little bit easier said than done. That doesn't mean that capitalist restoration has been reversed in the East, not at all. But it does mean that the form of capitalism that exists there is so marked by its origin in the worker state that the imperialist bourgeoisie itself considers it to be fundamentally untrustworthy. And in a way, perhaps that's analogous to the way the bourgeoisie once suspected its own Jewish components of being surrogates for communism. And I think that's why Hitlerism has been recreated in the Ukraine, in the Ukraine effectively under American sponsorship. What the US is still trying to do really is what Hitler tried and failed to do. And like the third, in Operation Barbarossa and the invasion of the Soviet Union ultimately, like the Third Reich, the US and NATO need to be destroyed, to be smashed. And our position on this war is that we are for the defence of Russia, and we give military support to Putin's forces based on the stated objectives of Putin in this conflict, which we consider to be defensive. And Putin's objectives are, one, to defend the rights and self-determination of the Russian and Russophone population in the east of present-day Ukraine, where they're the majority, of the two Donbass republics and Crimea, of course. But not just there. There are other parts of Ukraine where Russians are under threat as well. The second objective that Putin laid out is to denazify Ukraine, which must mean simply to defeat and root out the current neo-Nazi currents that are dominating in the government. And this may well involve the defeat of Zelensky's regime and its replacement by something more conciliatory. And objective number 3 is related to that, of course, is a neutral Ukraine that's barred from joining NATO. I think we think those demands are supportable in defensive terms, but they're not really our aims at all. Because we're for a Ukraine that's free of imperialist control financially and militarily. We're for the legalization of leftist and working class parties, and the crushing and banning of Nazi and the parties, the Nazis and the parties of the 2016 coup. And we're for the expropriation of imperialism's multinationals, controlled by the working class. We're for democratic referendums to be held, emulating those that have been held in the People's Republics, so-called, for whatever status the inhabitants decide. We don't support the prolonged occupation or annexation of territory where Russians are not the main population. That would be wrong in principle, and it would be dangerous. But those don't appear to be Putin's war aims. We could defend Russia on the grounds that it's a backward capitalist economy, not imperialist, and a semi-colony, therefore. But we think that would not be quite correct, because Russia is very advanced in some things, from military technology to medicine, more so in some cases than the United States. It's not uniformly a backward country, it's rather very uneven. And we think it's certainly not imperialist. We totally reject the rationalization of the third campists. And others have made errors on this question. For instance, the international Bolshevik tendency, as was. It's clear that Russia does not derive its economic strength from the continuing exploitation of backward countries, as does the United States, Britain, and all the imperialist countries in the last analysis. But it's also true that Russia is more independent of imperialism than any semi-colony. This is partly because as part of the retreat from neoliberalism, the degree of statification in the Russian economy has massively increased since the days of Yeltsin's mass privatization and shock treatment. And this statification is a classic means by which dependent and semi-colonial countries have defended themselves in the past against imperialism. There are many examples of this, from Iraq to even Ireland. But in the case of Russia, this is massively enhanced by the military and technological might, in a sense, that it's inherited from the USSR. And we think that's what's happened. And as NATO began to go on the offensive at the end of the 1990s, the central element of the oligarchy retreated from neoliberalism. We have an anomalous form of capitalism here that's out of step with imperialism. Its power to defy imperialism is still indirectly a product of the revolution. And the decree of Russia's dependency is sharply limited by this. Trotsky's theory of permanent revolution posited that democratic gains, including genuine national independence, can only be established by overthrowing the capitalists. But we would contend that capitalist restoration does not automatically reverse that, not in a mechanical sense, as both Russia and China actually show. And that raises the question of China. Trotsky himself, when he was talking about capitalist restoration, said that if a counter-revolution happened in the USSR, the new regime for a prolonged period would have to retain much of the nationalized economy. As it turns out, this is more applicable to China than to Russia. But the problem is that those who maintain that China is a worker state have to realize that it has more billionaires than the United States. And in that sense, the position that it's a worker state denies reality in a symmetrically opposite sense to the way Jerry Healy denied reality when he denied that a defunct worker state had come into being in Cuba after 1960. We think it's actually sort of like an inverse of that problem, of that theoretical error. But on the other hand, China's billionaires are much less wealthy than those in the United States, and they're not a fully consolidated bourgeois class. They're a hybrid oligarchy that's much more cohesive and disciplined than the oligarchy in Russia. But China looks even less like a semicolon than Russia does. As a concluding point, I'd say that this war is partly about revenge for Syria, because Russia was key in defeating imperialism in Syria, and they know it. But it's not actually predetermined that they will not be defeated here also, that imperialism could be defeated by Russia. And I think those who say that Russia are not imperialist yet, which is another point that I've heard people say, are also being somewhat deterministic. And we think there's no teleological reason why they should become imperialist in future. It's not determined in advance. I think that we think the whole phenomenon that we're dealing with now is an unforeseen consequence of the decay of the world revolution and then of the counter-revolution in 1989 to 1991. And it may be possible that imperialism is not ultimately capable of consummating these counter-revolutions. It may be that these contradictions may themselves create new opportunities for the world revolution. And I think I'll leave it there. Actually, that's a convenient point to leave off. Yeah. Okay.
Oh, thank you, Ian. Thank you, and thank you to the Liaison Committee for the Fourth International. Next scheduled speaker is Robert Montgomery from Class Conscious. I've just got to, Robert, I've just got to get you to unmute yourself. If you could unmute yourself, Robert. Beautiful. All right.
Is that unmuted? Okay.
Yep, we're ready to roll.
All ready to go. Okay. So I want to welcome comrades and friends on this. Well, I'm talking from Rhode Island in the US, and my name is Robert Montgomery, as Davey said, and I just want to start with saying this is a particularly auspicious day. I'm old enough to remember 60 years ago, in October 1962. I was a bit too young to understand the magnitude of the moment of the so-called Cuban Missile Crisis, but I did get what was going on with adults where they thought that the world was coming to an end. And I don't think it's going too far to say that we might be on the brink of a similar moment today. Okay. So I'm speaking to you on behalf of classconscious.org. We're a small Marxist website based in Australia and the US. A three-person editorial board has between us a combined 70 years of involvement in the Trotskyist movement. We published work on the character of the Chinese state, Marxist crisis theory, the threat of war and fascism, a history of policing, a long history of policing in the West, the fight for zero COVID, cultural reviews on books and films, etc. And all our material can be accessed at classconscious.org. For today's purposes, I want to refer you to two recent documents that Comrade Davey Heller and myself published. The first is Setting the Record Straight on Imperialism, Russia, Ukraine, and the US. The second is by Davey Heller, Imperialism Harnesses the Anti-War Movement to Prepare for World War III. I'll be paraphrasing these documents and I'd like to keep my comments within the time limits. So firstly, we see today's events within the context of a very deep crisis of world capitalism. Marx's law of value is asserting itself in long-term falling rates of profit on a world scale, and most acutely in the US nerve center of imperialism itself. The normal thirst for surplus value right now has turned into an insatiable hunger, a ravenous hunger on the part of imperialism for increased profitability. And this is driving the US and its allies to divide the world again in search of expanded markets for the export of capital and to capture for itself an increased share of the available surplus value produced. In response to its crisis of valorization, US capitalism is intensifying its attack on the working class both at home and abroad. Today, it is positioning itself geopolitically against Russia. The aim of the war is to reduce Russia to neo-colonial status, to open its vast mineral, agricultural, and energy resources to unhindered exploitation by imperialist finance capital. The ongoing mobilization, massive mobilization of military and economic power against Russia right now is reminiscent of nothing so much as the Nazi Operation Barbarossa of 80 years ago. The regional war in Ukraine cannot be separated from the US drive to crush both its strategic rivals, Russia and China, in order to maintain its declining global economic hegemony. And US hegemony is under threat, both from its own internal contradictions and from the rising economic strength of China. Recently, the US has been stymied by a combination of neo-colonial and lesser developed bourgeois regimes acting in concert, as we saw in Syria. Having failed in its regime change operation in Syria, largely due to Russian and Iranian military assistance, the US has decided to remove once and for all the Russian thorn from its side. The inner logic of events is unfolding towards a massive military confrontation between NATO and Russia that could draw in all major powers and result the specter of a nuclear holocaust. The conflict in Ukraine is not between poor little Ukraine and Russia. To be clear, this is a proxy war between imperialism led by the US and Russia. We once again see, as we did in 1914, a peace movement that supports imperialist war. The demand for action to save Ukraine, to stand with Ukraine, gives political cover to the war, as do all the anti-war groups campaigning under the third camp banner, neither Moscow nor NATO, no to NATO, no to Moscow. To demand peace in Ukraine is simply to join the chorus demanding that Russia and China submit to the Pax Americana and open themselves up to the untrammeled looting of their material, natural, and human resources. The mistaken assumption of the peace movement is that war can be avoided by allowing US and Western imperialism to exploit the world's resources without limit. This is a delusion. It's an absolute delusion. The only real anti-war position is to fight US imperialism's effort to dominate the globe, including by encircling and dismembering Russia, and to support the right of all countries in the crosshairs of imperialism to defend themselves. We at Class Conscious extend critical support to Russia's invasion of Ukraine. This is because we classify Russia not as imperialist, but as a nationalist and dependent bourgeois regime in conflict with imperialism. We support Russia's right to defend its national sovereignty against imperialist aggression on its borders, up to and including the use of military force. We extend military but no political support to the reactionary nationalist Putin regime. We call for the Russian working class to oust Putin and the oligarchs he represents. Should Russia be defeated by or capitulate to imperialism, it will mean a double chain around the necks of the working class of Russia as they toil under the dual domination of their own ruling class and that of imperialist capital as well. Today, the same imperialist knife at the throat of Russia is at the same time as also menacing Nicaragua, Venezuela, and Cuba. The ultimate target of this military and economic eruption is China. And as always, the butcher's knife is at the throats of all the working masses of the global South. We believe a military victory by Russia against imperialism would be a blow against imperialism everywhere. And I suspect that these sentiments are shared by those here who agree on the high stakes involved in imperialism's proxy war in Ukraine. So once again, comrades, the question is before us, as it was in 1914. What is to be done, or conversely, what is to be undone? As all the rotten opportunist groups bend the knee before bourgeois public opinion, as they give their objective support to the imperialist onslaught against Russia, it's time to ask, do we need to call a new Zimmerwald or issue a new Zimmerwald manifesto for the 21st century? In the teeth of the ongoing onslaught against Russia, it's our hope that we can move forward from this meeting in a united front of all revolutionary forces to call for the defeat of imperialism without qualification or equivocation of any sort whatsoever. To conclude, for an end to war, violence, fascism, for an abundant life for all, forward to the World Socialist Revolution, and from classconscious.org, say thank you for having us here today.
Thank you, Robert, for that contribution. All right, so next we'll move on to a contribution from our comrade Alan Gibson from the Bolshevik Tendency.
Okay, I'd like to start my remarks by briefly outlining how the Bolshevik Tendency understands the current situation. For us, the recognition that Russia is not an imperialist state is central to our understanding of the current conflict. I imagine that's shared by the comrades here. After the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991, Russia emerged as a capitalist regional power with an economy that is primarily centered on energy exports, not the extraction of super profits from other countries. American imperialism has reneged on its assurances made to Gorbachev that there would be no NATO expansion into Eastern Europe, and has instead continued to up the ante to the point of trying to include Georgia and Ukraine in the bloc. The ultimate objective of US imperialism, expressed by Dick Cheney and among others, is to chop up Russia into several smaller, more manageable states and gain control of its immense natural resources, as Robert referred to. Since the 2014 US-sponsored right-wing Maidan coup, the various Ukrainian governments have effectively been US puppet regimes, all run from Washington. We don't think the Zelensky regime is different in that regard. We therefore regard the current war as fundamentally between US NATO imperialism and non-imperialist Russia. Unfortunately, these events have taken place in the absence of an organized revolutionary workers' movement able to pose the question of power. In this context, Marxists favor the victory of non-imperialist Russia over the Ukrainian proxy of the US NATO imperialists. The section of the left that considers Russia to be imperialist, with all the varied political content they give that term, either sides with the Ukraine and therefore US NATO, or they are neutral and call for revolutionary defeatism on both sides. There are some who regard Russia as non-imperialist, but who do not favor the victory of the Russians, like the Spartacist League and the Internationalist Group. This is ostensibly because they do not consider this a conflict essentially between the imperialists and Russia, but rather one just of capitalist Russia invading capitalist Ukraine. Then there are anarchists who argue that even if there is a distinction between imperialist and non-imperialist, it makes no difference, as they are both capitalist. Although, ironically, in many cases, they side with poor, innocent Ukraine. However, what they all share in common is a failure to grasp the central importance of defeating the rapacious imperialists. The role of the fascists in Ukraine needs to be addressed, as it forms a considerable part of the narrative in the Facebook back and forth and in the mass media propaganda. It is clear that the fascists were key shock troops in the 2014 coup, and as a result were able to lodge themselves inside the state apparatus, both political and military. As part of that, they played a criminal role in the 8 years of violence against the DPR and LPR breakaway republics in the Donbass, which had resulted in some 14,000 casualties. However, for us, the presence of fascists in the Ukrainian military and wider state apparatus is secondary to the role of the US NATO imperialist military alliance. For us, the key issue for revolution in this conflict is opposing US NATO imperialism. A related question to this is recognizing what fascism is and the danger it poses to the left and workers' movement. Ukraine provides us with valuable lessons in this regard. If, for instance, we were to compare the activity of the dangerous organized fascist formations in Ukraine to the incoherent rightist populism of Donald Trump, who riled up his base, which included a minority of fascists and other ultra-rightists, in a riot aimed at overturning the results of the US 2020 election on 6th of January 2021, I think the difference is clear. The fascistic elements in the January 6th Capitol rebuilding riot would have wanted to have come out of that process as something equivalent to the right sector and the Azov battalion and so on, following the 2014 Euromaidan protests and subsequent coup, but they did not. They were not the decisive factor in that event, and there was never any question of them having significant influence over the state machinery or even the movement itself, unlike the Azov battalion and the other formations in Ukraine who are heavily armed and organized fascists. So regarding this meeting, we view it as a small step in affirming the Bolshevik understanding of the role of imperialism in the world against the barrage of war propaganda coming out of the bourgeois mass media and our governments, for those of us who live in those countries. There is always huge pressure to adapt to prevailing forces, as we unfortunately see in the response of most of the left. It is also important to see the current conflict in the wider geopolitical context of the imperialist, particularly the US, desire to destroy the Chinese deformed worker state and open up to direct and punitive exploitation. Now, of course, the cancer of capitalist social relations has been allowed to take root, and quite deeply, in China. The bureaucrats heading the deformed worker state are playing a dangerous game, trying to contain the interest of capital while at the same time maintaining living standards of the working people. This tension will have to be resolved, and the danger of a capitalist counter-revolution is great. However, that has not happened yet, and China remains a deformed worker state which must be defended. So going back to the current conflict, from what I can tell, and there's a lot of fog of war out there, the Russians so far seem to have pretty much done what they intended to, or at least what they stated they intended to. It was all about ensuring that Ukraine will never join NATO. It was about degrading the fascistic elements within the Ukrainian military who threaten Russia. It was about solidifying and expanding the DPR and LPR to encompass most of the Donbass. It was about creating a land bridge to Crimea, and as part of that, opening up security of water supply to Crimea. Some 75,000 or so Ukrainian soldiers are now surrounded in what the Russians are calling cauldrons. And over the next week or so, those soldiers, many of them Nazi sympathizers, will either surrender or be liquidated. The Russians have effectively complete control of the air, hence the calls for NATO to enforce a no-fly zone, and could have leveled any city had they wanted to. Yet apart from Mariupol, which was a stronghold of the fascistic Azov battalion, they have attempted to minimize damage to urban areas. For instance, all the civilian infrastructure, water, electricity, heating, gas, communications, etc., remain completely operational in Kiev and Kharkiv. I don't know if people saw the Newsweek report from a American intelligence expert who was arguing this very case, that the Russians are not attacking civilians. So continuing the war will only bring more chaos and suffering for ordinary Ukrainians. The refusal of the Ukrainian government to settle the conflict by acceding to Russian proposals can only mean more needless suffering. Although, unfortunately, this seems to be exactly what the US and its NATO allies are aiming at. By continuing to inflame the situation and in prolonging the conflict, they are playing with the possibility of this war turning nuclear, a prospect that would mean the end of human civilization. So we welcome the chance to participate in this event alongside other leftists to understand that the central question is opposition to US-NATO imperialism. It is necessary to seek to regroup and reorganize those forces that are seriously committed to the difficult struggle to reforge a viable mass revolutionary workers' organization on an international basis. But this desire cannot be achieved by papering over significant programmatic issues in the interest of projecting a degree of unity which is not real. Comrades might have seen that at the beginning of the week, Left Voice called for a new Zimmerwald on a different political basis, of course. And what we really need in this circumstance is a Zimmerwald left, based on intransigent opposition to imperialist aggression, whether directly or through its proxies. Such a formation would necessarily see that US-NATO aggression against Russia through the Ukrainian proxy is occurring in the wider framework of increasing imperialist hostility towards the Chinese deformed workers' state. For those unfamiliar with our organization, the Bolshevik tendency stands in the tradition of the revolutionary Spartacist League of the 1960s and 1970s, before that organization's programmatic degeneration into the brain-dead obedience cult that it is today. So that revolutionary political heritage would frame any discussions on a more substantive unity from our point of view. For people wanting to know more about our wider programmatic perspectives, you can visit our website at Bolshevik Tendency, that's one word run together, bolsheviktendency.org. Thank you.
Thank you, Alan, and thank you for the Bolshevik Tendency for your participation. All right, our next speaker is Nikos from the Communist Revolutionary Action, or KED, in Greece. Thank you.
Hello, comrades. I hope that you can hear me clearly. On behalf of the Communist Revolutionary Action Avant-Garde, I would like to say thank you for inviting us to the present discussion. It is an honor to be among other comrades in the world, having the same internationalist stance on the context of the latest developments. I would like to start my talk with a small excerpt from our history. It was when the convention of the Zimmerwald took place, the remaining internationalist socialists that participated there, Trotsky made a small comment while they were going towards the village. The internationalists that participated in the Zimmerwald Trotsky said that they could fit inside a small horse carriage, and he was making fun with the other comrades, saying that how crazy it was that the whole second internationalists, the only internationalists that survived from the second international could just fit inside the horse carriage. Well, if I could make this parallel between this moment and us, I would say that I'm very happy to be part of this present digital carriage between us. So, okay, let me now continue with the more serious part of my intervention today. The problem regarding Ukraine from a left-wing perspective is actually of a problem of a historical, thus political essence. What I would like to say is that what is happening right now in the majority of the communist and socialist organizations in the world is that they are trying to mechanically project previous situations of the past in the context of today's problems. What I mean right now is that most communist organizations are just what they are doing is that they're copy-pasting the line regarding the First World War, and they say that the situation the same, it's just a fight between two imperialists, so defeatism is the proper line. We take no part between either imperialist. The issue is that the reason why they are leading towards this very simplistic copy-paste is because of a much deeper issue, which is the fact that they are mechanically trying to use Lenin's 5 famous criteria for designating a country as imperialist. So the rationale is very simplistic in a way. What they are doing is that they're saying, oh, Russia has financial capital. Oh, Russia has exports of capital. So in a very simplistic way, they are defining Russia as an imperialist nation. The problem regarding that is that if we take the same rationale and project it to other nations, we could also say that Iran, Syria, that China is imperialist, or even Mexico is imperialist. And from a logical perspective, if we define that, if we say right now that the whole world is full of imperialists, then the interpretational value of the world imperialism loses its value, right? And it loses its value because if everything is imperialist, then nothing is imperialist. This logical problem, in our opinion, there is somehow like a falsification of Leninism. And the issue is that they are not truly Leninists, the people who are using this kind of rationale. The 5 criteria are not actually used. What is inherently essentially more deep, I don't know how to say it, existent in their methodology is actually a very classic liberal understanding of designating nations. What they are actually using is explicit violence as a criterion. So what they are saying, in our opinion, is that everything, whoever invades anyone is actually an imperialist. And it's not without, it's not by chance that the same people, the same organizations who are defining right now Russia as imperialist, in the past, they have said that Iran is an imperialist, that Syria wages an imperialist war against other nations, etc., etc., etc. So what we believe is that in essence, there is a liberalist thought of how they are designating countries, an externalist, a phenomenological aspect, not an essentialism. And with this criteria, they're actually breaking down from historical materialism. So the issue is that this liberalism works as somehow like a hijacking of their thought. So to the extent that their thought is hijacked by this liberal thinking, the political issues that they that they raise are actually a leftist expression of bourgeoisie politics. They are actually implementing bourgeois politics in a left-wing manner, in a left-wing expression. And due to that thing, even though these comrades might say that they are internationalists, communists, and I don't know what else, in essence, they are chauvinists. They are social chauvinists, because chauvinism is expressed in the dire moments of the existence of an imperialist system. In the most problematic, in the most critical stances of a system, is chauvinism truly expressed? But let me continue with the next part of my discussion, of my intervention. Because it's not enough to criticize other organizations, it's very important to positively define what is imperialism today. And I will try to do so in a few sentences. In our opinion, there is a very dire need for redefining how the map looks like. It's very important to define how modern imperialism is expressed, is structured, etc. In our opinion, the viewpoint that best describes ours is the notion of empire. In our opinion, this is the historical analysis that we make. After the World War II, Western imperialism joined with each other and created one singular bloc, one singular imperialist front, which was used against communism and to counter colonial and to fight for the survival of colonial structures. Right now, the NATO, IMF, the World Bank, the EU, the OECD, and of course are aspects of the structure of this empire. The petrodollar is actually a very strong tool of the empire. All these are mechanisms and part of the structures of the empire. And of course, this empire is called American empire. It's because the American government is of course the primary organizer of this modern imperialism and represents its core. And of course, so in our opinion, what is defined today is imperialism. We don't need to use all these 5 criteria of Lenin, but whoever participates in this system is part of the imperialist structure. So in our opinion, EU, America, the US, Canada, Japan, South Korea, and Australia and New Zealand, of course, are the only nations which can only be defined today as imperialist. All others are not imperialist. And we can also see that by also following a very close-minded economistic analysis, by seeing per capita income, who exploits the world today. Of course, these are the nations. So in the context of this analysis, what we are seeing right now in Ukraine is actually part of the general plan of the American empire and its proxies to generalize its authority and power to unconquered lands. After the dissolution of the USSR, NATO and the US have been enraged, trying to establish orange revolutions, coups, and invasions all over the earth. And we in Greece have also experienced that in our close neighborhood by seeing the dissolution of Yugoslavia. And of course, the Orange Revolution in Syria. We see Ukraine right now as the latest plan of imperialism, of balkanizing one of the last adversaries on earth, which is the Russian Federation. Russia, by other comrades also discussed about this part, but Russia, by inheriting from USSR this powerful military, this is why it is still able of surviving, of having some kind of independent political life. So what we are seeing right now in Ukraine is only the result of imperialist aggressivity. So the staging of the Maidan coup, the strengthening of the Nazi militias, the rewriting of history, all of these are part of NATO's plan of doing to Russia what they did to Middle East and Yugoslavia. And of course, they tried to do that in the past with the very known conflicts in Chechnya and in the Caucasus region in general. But okay, many organizations have a problem using this kind of rationale. We could also use some other criterion as well. Do these organizations recognize that right now we've had almost 15,000 dead Russophones in Donbass and general Ukraine? Isn't that defined as a genocide? Because the West defined as a genocide other mass murders, which were less gruesome than this one, like in Bosnia, for example. Yes. So what I'm trying to say is that we don't have to get too far. We could also use Lenin's criterion of the right of the nations for self-determination. And we should respect the decision of these populations for self-determination. And the Marxists who are proclaiming themselves as Marxists and they do not acknowledge this criterion for these populations are actually chauvinists. They are representing the rights of their own bourgeoisie. So in our opinion, internationalists, communists, and of course all the progressive people of the world should want the crushing of the enemy. We should want the crushing of the Ukro-Nazi militaries who have stolen the right to represent the Ukrainian people. And this is also another important fact is that who is fighting in Donbass or who is supporting Donbass? It is not without chance the fact that we have seen Iranians, African people from Africa wanting to fight in Ukraine because they understand the historical and world significance of this fight for their own countries. They are more conscious of the global implications of the destruction of the NATO hand in Ukraine than internationalists in the First World. These people who might also not be communists are more conscious of the implications of this issue in their own country. And this is why they want to fight there. So I would also like to close by saying that this fight is also very significant for us, people who are in the First World, people who are part of the privileged part of the world. because as history has shown, when imperialism plans defeat, then the defeat is internalized. It comes home. And it's not without chance the fact that May 68, in our analysis, was the product of Vietnam and the product of the defeat in Algeria and Morocco. So, so in our opinion, the best possible scenario would be the destruction of the Ukro-Nazis and the NATO militias, because this will not only facilitate the survival of the people of Donbass, but it will also facilitate on the maximization of class struggle in Europe, in the US, in Australia, etc. This is what I wanted to say. Again, thank you very much for inviting us. Comradely regards to everyone. Hope we have a good struggle. Thank you a lot.
Thank you very much, Nikos, and the KED from Greece for that important contribution. Okay, so next up we have Greg Butterfield from the Socialist Unity Party in the United States.
Thank you, Davey. Good afternoon, comrades from here in New York and whatever time it is where you are in the world right now. We want to thank the organizers for inviting us to participate in this important event. As Davey said at the beginning of the meeting, there are turning points in history, right, where the principles of organizations and individuals get tested and clarified. And this is one of those moments. It's been coming for a while. And some of us who have been, deeply engaged in the struggle around Ukraine and Donbass over the last 8 years have been, trying to put up an alarm around it. And certainly here in the US, it's been very difficult to get any traction. And now we're seeing the consequences of that. In the past month, we've seen so many anti-war and left formations bow to the intense pressure of imperialist propaganda and catering to the cowardice of funders and fellow travelers ahead of anti-imperialism and the interests of the workers and oppressed. The other side of that coin is that the war crisis is separating the wheat from the chaff. Leaders and organizations that have coasted through recent years and decades on past accomplishments are now forced to show where they really stand. And at the same time, I think as this forum is an example, groups that maybe were separated by historical differences and secondary issues may now find a new basis to work together and learn from each other. The Socialist Unity Party and Struggle La Lucha newspaper called for the victory of the Donbass republics and Russia in their defensive joint military operation to denazify and demilitarize Ukraine. What this really means is to end the 8-year genocidal war against the people of Donbass, to remove the neo-Nazi boot heel from the neck of the Ukrainian people, to reverse Ukraine's transformation into a NATO war base that poses a constant threat to Russia, and return it to the formally neutral status before the coup of 2014. We call for the defeat of US imperialism, which instigated this war, and is a combatant in it as surely as it is in Yemen or anywhere else Washington's proxy wars are carried out. After this week's NATO summit, the imperialists are moving closer to direct intervention, which of course could, as we all know, could precipitate an unprecedented global war. We think it's very important to elevate the struggle of the people of the Donbass region, the Donetsk and Lugansk People's Republics. Too often, their struggle is ignored by the left, or following the lead of the corporate media, is written off merely as Russian separatists or Putin's proxies. But such a view can only be argued by people who are completely ignorant of the Donbass and the anti-fascist struggle of the people there over the last 8 years. How they've persevered through constant terror by the Ukrainian armed forces and the neo-Nazi battalions, how they've survived through, a very brutal blockade, how it draws upon the deep traditions of internationalism and anti-fascism inherited from the Soviet people, and how that resistance found an echo in Russia. Or it's argued only by those who know better but are adapting their views to the needs of imperialism, which is much of what we see in the movement right now. Revolutionary Marxists look below the surface to understand the class forces and contradictions at work. Those who focus on Putin and the Russian capitalists' reactionary ideology ignore the dialectical relationship between Russia's struggle to maintain its sovereignty against the US and NATO and the anti-fascist struggle in Donbass and Ukraine. That same dynamic exists on a global scale. Looking at it purely on the surface level of political pronouncements, you could come to the conclusion that there's little difference between Russia and Bolsonaro's Brazil or Modi's India. But unlike those countries whose ruling classes are fundamentally tied to imperialism, the life and death struggle of Russia, not to be dissected and swallowed up by imperialism, has pushed it into the camp of countries and movements resisting the US, including Venezuela, Cuba, China, the DPRK, Syria, Yemen, and Iran. With our modest forces here in the US, we're doing what we can to clarify the issues and bring a genuine anti-war position to the working class. We've launched a campaign called Stop the War Lies, which is aimed at exposing the US-NATO role in Ukraine, exposing imperialism's cozy relationship with the Ukrainian fascists, educating about the cause of Donbass, and exposing how Wall Street, big oil, and the military industry profit from the war at the expense of people here. We and allied groups have been getting out into communities with fact sheets, holding picket lines and speakouts. Just last night, our comrades in the city of Baltimore held a rush hour banner drop and leafleting action. Today, folks in New Orleans and San Diego are doing community outreach. And next weekend, on April 2nd, which is the anniversary weekend of Martin Luther King's assassination, we're building protests in New York and Los Angeles. Also tomorrow, March 27th, we're organizing a webinar featuring speakers from Donbass to help inform the anti-war movement and the left in the US about the reality of the US-Ukraine war. And we're working on a speaking tour for this spring. Those are some of the actual concrete things we're working on right now. We invite organizations here on this call to join in this effort. We're open to collaborating with groups here in the US and internationally. This is a moment to overcome secondary differences and build a united front against imperialism and war that can lay the foundation for future revolutionary struggles. Thanks again.
Thank you very much, Greg, and thank you for the Socialist Unity Party, their contribution, and I hope people can support some of those initiatives moving forward. So our next speaker is Jerry Downing from Socialist Fight.
Okay, can I say first that this is a very inspiring meeting, and being that I'm speaking last of the main speakers, most of the stuff I was going to say has already been said, so I can't actually repeat it all. So I'll make some observations that I think are relevant. First of all, on the question of the United Front, the Socialist Fight has actually participated in 3 versions of the United Front up to now. Well, we've got our own Socialist Fight leaflet that you can see, which calls for no to NATO aggression. Our main enemy is at home. We have the Socialist Labour, who are people who were in the Labour Party but have now been expelled, actually, and it has the same headline. The victory to the anti-fascist forces of Donbass and their allies, jointly with the consistent Democrats, the New Communist Party, and the Fascists. So those are three united fronts. But I do endorse the Robert Montgomery's position and the class conscious position, the call for a new Zimmerwald. Certainly, I think that should be the top of the agenda to draw together everybody that recognizes U.S. imperialism as a global hegemonic imperialist power that organizes all the other imperialists. Biden has just boasted that never was NATO so united as they are at the moment. Those people that recognize that is the main enemy of all humanity, all oppressed humanity, and the working class, then I know Zimmerwald is necessary. So that would be the fourth united front. But we've just heard the call for the left Zimmerwald. Well, we do remember it, and the left Zimmerwald fell into a horse carriage apparently. Well, we would mention that in the left Zimmerwald there was Lenin, Trotsky, Zinoviev, and Karl Liebknecht, to mention a few. Now I don't know who here is the Lenin and who is the Trotsky and the Zinoviev and the Liebknecht, but I'm sure somebody will want to fill those roles as the struggle developed. A few other points. The sanctions on Russia are very severe, but there are people that are questioning how these sanctions are going to work, and if in fact the imposition of these sanctions on the banks and everything will in fact bring into question the global hegemonic position of the dollar itself. If Russia and China are supposed are forced to collaborate together closely using their own currencies, Russia is now saying that it will only accept payment in rubles for the moment, and we have peculiar phenomenon developing in that we have India took a neutral position on this, and although Boris Johnson and Biden put all the pressure they could on Saudi Arabia did not promise to increase its oil supplies, and a whole swathe of third world countries are not accepting the imposition of U.S. Domination to the extent that's necessary. So it would be a very interesting development if the whole question of that hegemonic power is built on, which is basically the dollar as the world trading currency and the world's reserve currency, and its ability to sanction whoever it wants. Oh, by the way, I have differences with Alan about whether China is a deformed worker state or not. But at the same time, I am quite certain that it's not an imperialist power. It cannot do any of that stuff that the United States does in terms of sanctioning other people. It cannot. It doesn't dominate the International Monetary Fund, and it doesn't dominate the World Bank. It is not at all in a position, although it is a part of the international the World Trading Organization. Just a few more points quickly. I would have thought that the question of who is the outright supporters of imperialism on the left, well, that that accolade undoubtedly goes to the Ukraine Solidarity campaign. This is Chris Ford's baby, and I would mention that the Weekly Worker have a very interesting article today by Paul Houston, A Toxic Operation, where he mentions, of course, like we mentioned back in 2014 when that whole Maidan coup thing broke up, that actually Chris Ford's origin was in an organization that was funded by the CIA in London. As it happened, well, people say he was a willing idiot and he didn't know. Well, if you're in an organization that the CIA is prepared to fund, then you're definitely moving in absolutely the wrong direction. Of course, we have the other participants, the AW. Well, who would expect anything else from the Alliance for Workers' Liberty? Sean McGamna, a man from the County Clare in Ireland, who supports basically the loyalist community in the north of Ireland against the nationalist community. Well, we wouldn't expect any, but and by the way, he calls himself, he says proudly, "I am a Zionist." And poor old Martin Thomas, who's the second in command, I suppose the secondary leader, he said, "Well, I'm a bit of a Zionist, not the full shilling, but just a bit of a Zionist." So that's that organization. Unfortunately, also got in there is the USEC group, the anti-capitalist alliances there, as they're now. Have Fred LaPlatte spoke at it. The Labour Representation Committee, they participated in this, as did a number of other former leftists. So it is a very nasty situation. Lastly, then, on the question of the influence of fascism within Ukraine. Well, they say, well, you know, the Svoboda only got something like 1.25% in the last election, as compared to the vote that Marine Le Pen got in France. But I'm sure Marine Le Pen would give her right arm for an organization within the armed forces, such as the Azov battalion, to back up her politics, knowing that at a certain point a coup was possible against the Jewish president. And the Jewish president, of course, is very careful that he doesn't upset the far right. He promised at the beginning to bring the country together, but he didn't bring it together far too much. As soon as the Azov battalion let him know where he stood in the situation, and lastly, well, I said last, but a word of warning: the Putin also has his far right scoundrels within his camp. He's got the National Bolsheviks, and he's got the Wagner Group. Now they tell us that the Wagner Group has got 40 assassins ready to assassinate Zelensky, his family, and the leaders. I would suggest that these 40 assassins, their main task would be to watch out for any revolutionary movement within the working class in Ukraine and assassinate them. We must never forget, as anti-imperialism is our our main slogan that what happened to the Shanghai Soviet back in April of 1927, when they abandoned the defense against the bourgeois nationalist Chiang Kai-shek and how he dealt with them. So going too far in that direction is something we must be very careful of. Thank you.
Thank you, Jerry and Socialist Fight. So that brings us to the end of the main speakers. At this point, we'd like to see whether anyone would like to make a shorter presentation before we open it up, perhaps for some briefly final comments. Was any Liga Comunista or the Argentinian comrades, Tendency Militant Bolshevik, or the South Korean Bolshevik group? Would any of you like to make a short statement? Or the DIP from Turkey?
Sure, we can go. I mean, that's right. I'm not hearing you, Davey. I believe you're muted.
I'm sorry. Yeah. So yeah, if you'd like to speak, that would be great.
Yeah, sure.
You want to introduce yourself, sorry?
So yeah, I'm participating for the Revolutionary Workers' Party, DIP. Hello, everyone. Well, while as the DIP Revolutionary Workers' Party, we are here as observers, I want to thank Davey and all the organizers for letting me take the floor, to briefly introduce the position and activities of the Revolutionary Workers' Party on the strategic issue that is the war between imperialism and Russia. And I would also like to thank Class Conscious and Davey for making this very important event happen. Let me start by underlining that as a revolutionary Marxist party in the region, DIP has been long paying attention to the evolution of the situation in Ukraine, well before the recent acceleration of events turned it into a global hotspot. And this attention included numerous articles in Turkish on our monthly paper, Gerçek, which is the Turkish namesake of Pravda, Truth, as well as an international campaign we organized along with numerous organizations and individuals on the occasion of the fascist massacre in Odessa in 2014. The text published for this last campaign and many others could be found in English on RedMed, a website publishing in a dozen of languages and that we run with our comrades from the EEK, Workers' Revolutionary Party in Greece. And therefore, in mid-February, before the outbreak of war, we published a joint statement bringing together Christian Rakowski International Socialist Center and RedMed Web Network, uniting revolutionary organizations from Turkey, Greece, Russia, France, and Finland. The call of the statement was built around the slogans of workers of the NATO countries, work to destroy NATO, and in case of war, work for the defeat of imperialism. Throughout the last period leading to the open war between Russia and imperialism, DIP underlined that Russia was not an imperialist country, has been fighting a defensive war, and the Revolutionary Workers' Party ran its political campaign around the slogan of out of NATO, destroy NATO. The initial statement of DIP on the issue of war when the open war started stated clearly that the way to peace is through the military defeat of NATO and its proxies. It affirmed that the war is not between Russia and Ukraine, but rather the Zelensky government is but a proxy of NATO, and Ukraine is only fighting a proxy war in the name of imperialism. Accordingly, both in Turkey and on an international scale, DIP organized several events and demonstrations as a part of its bid to bring about the defeat and destruction of NATO. To begin with, on February 18th, which was the 17th anniversary of Turkey joining NATO, DIP had been one of the initiators of a demonstration that brought together several revolutionary and left groups under the slogan of out of NATO and close imperialist bases. The rally took place in a historically charged place, Dolmabahce, where the revolutionary youth of Turkey had once thrown the Navy men of the US Sixth Fleet into the sea. Accordingly, the slogans of the demonstration included "Imperialists and lackeys, do not forget what happened to the Sixth Fleet." Also, on March 11th, the English edition of our theoretical journal, Revolutionary Marxism, organized a webinar on the issue of war, which brought together revolutionary Marxists from Turkey, Greece, and Russia. Finally, DIP, along with several other groups in Turkey, commenced a political campaign under the title of "The Nemesis of the World Peace is NATO and Imperialism." And in this recently started campaign, we have so far organized a nationwide petition with the participation of organizations, militants, trade union leaders, and artists, but more is to come. And we, the DIP, the Revolutionary Workers' Party, are undeterred to fight for the defeat and destruction of NATO, the biggest terrorist organization known to humankind. Thank you, comrades.
Thank you very much for that contribution. All right, is there a statement from I'm waiting for something from our comrades in South Korea in the notes for me to read out. Is that coming? Perhaps not. Is there anyone else who would like to make a short presentation? Just before we do that, I just also wanted to clarify that this is a co-initiative of Liga Comunista in Brazil and Class Conscious. It was literally an idea that was out of a discussions and a co-idea. So
oh, sorry, Conrad.
Someone's a bit echoey.
May I speak now?
This is why we is there anyone who would like to make a closing summative remark from any who's spoken previously? If not, that's okay. We can always close the meeting.
That's the Bolshevik group, but they got noise problems.
Thanks. I couldn't see where that was coming from. Is there just while we see if the Bolshevik group were going to make a comment, does anyone else want to make any closing remarks based on what they've heard?
Can you hear me?
Oh, yes, we can hear you. Yep.
Okay. We are ready to
Present our statement.
present our statement.
Brilliant.
After that, we will post our text on the chatting window. Oh,
Great.
Hello, comrade. I'm representing this statement on behalf of Bolshevik Group of South Korea. So after the outbreak of war in Ukraine, outrageous anti-Russian racist sentiment is raging over the regions under US influence. Only a handful of left-wing organizations pointed out the march of NATO eastward led by US as the cause of the war and called for the defeat of NATO and the victory of Russia. Perhaps most of the organizations gathered here today belong to this category. I don't know if all the organizations gathered here will go along together, but the political line shared today by the comrades gathered here will be one of the core programs of the new international. In this regard, this meeting is meaningful, and we welcome comrades from BT for joining its ranks. Although it was not announced, comrades of BT, along with us, took a position of supporting Russian victory in the 2008 Georgian War. And today, in 2022, these comrades also submitted a position almost similar to our position that the Ukrainian war is a war of self-defense conducted by neo-colonial Russia, Belarus, and Donbas. But there's something I have to point out. It is a question of position regarding the Euromaidan movement, which changed Yanukovych regime into a pro-NATO regime in 2014. We believe that we should have formed a united front with Yanukovych regime against the pro-NATO coupsters at the time. Ukrainian coup in 2014 was a pro-imperialist regime change operation, which shares the same characteristics with Libya in 2011, Syria in 2013, Egypt in 2013, Turkey in 2016, and impeachment of Brazilian president in 2016. If the working class under the leadership of the Revolutionary Party at the time had taken the line, it would have avoided the destruction of the left-wing labor movement by the pro-imperialist Nazi regime and the suffering of the people due to the civil war during 2014 to 2022. At the time, BT knew that Ukrainian Euromaidan movement was a pro-imperialist regime change operation and a fascist movement that will wipe out the labor movement. Nevertheless, neutrality was proposed as a conclusion. The correct response should be coordinated with the correct analysis of the cause. However, they analyzed the cause correctly in the first place, but immediately suggested an erroneous conclusion. Then they labeled those self-contradictory anti-working class conclusions as Marxist. The same logic can be found in the 2011 Libyan and Syrian war. We believe that this opportunistic neutralist line is a reflection of Anglo-chauvinism based on the super profits of US-British imperialism, which has enjoyed hegemony for more than 100 years. How do you think about it? Also, can BT's correct position on the 2022 Ukrainian war today be considered as the beginning of self-reflection and correction on past opportunistic neutralist lines, including positions on Ukraine in 2014? Thank you, comrade.
All right, thank you very much to the Bolshevik group in South Korea for their contribution. Is there I think that's every group has now had an opportunity to make a contribution. We've got maybe we said we'd go for 90 minutes, which is about another 5 minutes. But if there's anyone who would like to, we could wrap it up, or if there's anyone who would like to make a 1 minute closing remark, that would also be welcome. Everyone, yep.
Yeah, is Greg Butterfield still with us?
I'm not sure. That's okay.
Okay. Yeah, I wanted to ask him. I would just repeat that the Socialist Unity Party, he mentioned they do have a webinar tomorrow with voices from the Donbass, which I think is is very important and would be of interest to watch that, because as Greg stated, the Donbass is getting lost in the entire conversation. And I noticed that one of the speakers is Alexei Albu, who was horribly burned in the Odessa massacre, the trade union, the incineration of the trade union's building in May in Odessa in 2014. And there are other comrades from the Donbass speaking. So I guess that could be, people could go to their Facebook page or their Socialist Unity Party. You can find, I believe it's tomorrow afternoon. So I just wanted to reinforce that.
Thanks, Robert. All right, well, just for some closing remarks, thanks again to all our speakers and those who have joined us from around the world watching on Facebook. I think it's clear there's a lot of common ground between the speakers, a lot of overlap from these organizations around the very important demand that we oppose US imperialism and we defend Russia's right to self-defense and that's how the prism from which we see the war in Ukraine. There's obviously differences between the groups, and as has been pointed, I don't think anyone here would like to paper over those differences. But in the spirit of the United Front, we have to work. I think we've shown by turning up today that there is a will and a need for us to work together to build this anti-imperialist movement. And just turning up today, I think, is an important start to that process. And we know that the culture of the Marxist movement is not really hasn't really been a strong cross cooperation of groups. And even attending a forum organized by another group is not a small thing within that culture. So I think we've done something today to break that down. And I think on behalf of Liga Comunista and Class Conscious who initiated it, we thank you all for making that step. I think we all understand at this point in history, it's just not a luxury that the Marxist movement can afford for all of us to stay in our bunkers. But that said, importantly, we have to find common ground and acknowledge our differences. So hopefully we'll be moving forward and in discussions, all the groups here and any other groups that we come across who share our genuine anti-imperialist position, and we can work towards other forms of joint action and joint statements in the very near future. So just to wrap it up, today we're using all this great technology to manifest. Sorry, Humberto, would you like to make a statement before we wrap up?
Excuse me, David.
No, please.
Vinícius, você pode me ajudar?
Sim.
Diz que nós não falamos inglês, mas nós vamos publicar no chat e nós gostaríamos que fosse lido a nossa mensagem.
Okay, so the Liga Comunista does not speak English, its leadership, but they will post their statement in the chat, and would ask it to be read.
Of course, yeah. Sorry, I misunderstood that was wrapping it up before that happened, so I apologize. Please.
I will use the chat too.
Vinícius, traduz que o GM da Argentina também vai publicar.
Okay, GM from Argentina will also publish his statement in the chat.
Okay, yeah, put it in the chat and I'll read it out. Please do that now.
Certo, pode postar que ele vai ler as falas.
Ok. Fala que eu não estou conseguindo publicar no chat e eu vou enviar para você, porque o texto é relativamente grande. Eu vou enviar outro texto um pouco maior do que aquele que eu te enviei, Vinícius, E você vai ler, tá bom?
Tudo bem. Okay, so he's not been able, he cannot post it in the chat, the text, because it's too large. So he will send it to me and I'll read it here.
Whatever works, please.
Okay.
Thank you.
Não, espera, espera que eu vou apagar de novo. Peraí, só um instante. Só um instante. Estou tendo dificuldade aqui para te mandar o texto todo. Pronto, pode ler.
Tudo bem. Okay, so I'll start reading it now.
Thank you.
Revolutionary greetings from the Communist League of Brazil. It is with great pleasure that we organize and participate in this forum. 8 years ago, we denounced the Nazi Euromaidan revolution and defended the People's Republics of Donbass. Putin recognized them and started defending them very late, after nearly 15,000 dead. We are very happy to be able to share a broadcast and video with comrades like Greg from La Lucha newspaper. And we follow the good work they do in defense of the people of Donbass and fighters like those of Borochba. I agree with you that the war is separating the wheat from the chaff, as the First and Second Wars also did. We will join with the SUP's Stop the Lies of War campaign. We were happy to see Comrade Jerry Downing again, even though we are in different organizations today. It's once again a pleasure to be with my comrades GM from Argentina and Ian from the UK. We were happy to see the comrades from the Greek KED again, and I thought the criticism that the comrade from Greece has just made of the liberal leftist mechanism of transposing too lazy to think the situation of the First War to the present time was brilliant. Welcome to the comrades of South Korea, of the South Korean Bolshevik group, and we are pleased to meet the comrades from the Turkish DIP. Unfortunately, I don't speak English, and my comrade Vinicius from Brazil is here to help me, as is my friend Davy. Before I forget, we will support Robert Montgomery's position for a new Zimmerwald. I think my LCFI comrades are in a full agreement with that, and it's a pleasure to meet Comrade Alan from BT. We consider that the characterization that Russia is waging a just and defensive war, as the Turkish DIP comrade has just stated, against imperialism can only be born of organizations that learn best from the method of Trotskyism, that were born in the revolutionary defensism of Trotsky in his political battles against the petty bourgeoisie within the Trotskyist movement at the beginning of the Second World War. Now we are on the eve of the Third World War, and we find it necessary to strongly rescue the revolutionary defense legacy, now that we need to unmask the imperialist war propaganda, also propagated by the petty bourgeois and pro-imperialist, pro-NATO, and pro-AUKUS fraction of Trotskyism. 30 years ago, we were inspired by the IBT's audacious and defensive stance in August 1991. From 2008 onwards, the IBT capitulated to the pressure of Anglo-Saxon imperialism and began to characterize Russia as an imperialist nation. But Russia is a backward and dependent economy. Russia's gross domestic product, GDP, is the size of Brazil's GDP after Brazil suffered a coup d'etat, a pandemic, and a Bolsonaro government that sank the Brazilian economy. Russia does not exercise imperialist domination over any people. For us, Russia is not even a capitalist power because, after all, it does not exercise power over the peoples for its capital, but for the dependence that the world has on the energy matrix of oil and gas. But Russia is not the same as Brazil or India because when it returned to capitalism, it had solved tasks that semi-colonial countries like Brazil and India did not solve, and this makes it a different capitalist country, albeit a capitalist one where a new revolution is needed. Social. The IBT is probably one of the forerunners of the characterization that Russia is imperialist in Trotskyism, a low trick not to oppose imperialism. It puts an equal sign between the oppressed and the oppressor, a trick as low as that of renouncing the defense of Iraq, Libya, or Syria against imperialism on the grounds of the supposed undemocratic character of these governments. This has nothing to do with Marxism. Trotsky said he would even stand with the semi-fascist Getúlio Vargas against of Brazil against democratic England. So what interests us here is not the Putin regime against which the workers will have to rise up one day to resume the course of the 1917 revolution, but cannot be manipulated by the CIA, which can even resort to trade unionism in order to create yet another color revolution. From the LCFI, we recognize the important role of the BT as the progressive heir of the IBT in its stance on the August 1991 coup. We also recognize the advanced position of BT comrades in opposing imperialism today. Doubly advanced positions coming from within the imperialist countries themselves and bearing the pressure. But we need to record that the IBT disbands after 25 years without having progressed organically during this period. And I think that the fact that it did not create sections beyond the imperialist centers is due to the pernicious legacy of the pro-imperialist policy of Spartacism that failed to win over the communists in the semi-colonies, and for that reason it was organizationally trapped in a kind of conservative sectarianism. So as we understand in the LCFI, we need to understand the issue of the current war from the point of view of revolutionary anti-imperialist defensism and the conceptions of revolutionary permanentism in the 21st century, as my comrade GM from Argentina will better explain. For the end of NATO, death to imperialism, and long life to revolutionary Marxism.
All right. Well, thank you very much. And
I go to the chat. Please in the chat.
okay. All right. Thank you very much. I think that was a good contribution to finish on. So we kind of summed up some points. So once again, thanks for everyone participating. I think we're all agreeing. Is there a
comrade Jim from Argentina will publish too in chat.
Okay. Sorry, I misunderstood once again. All right, so there's a statement in the chat, is there?
Yeah.
I'm a little confused. Is there a statement from the Argentinian comrades in the chat? There is. Does anyone else who can see it want to read it?
Do you can read, David?
I'll read. I'll just try to.
It's at the bottom.
Is it? Okay. Ah, yes, sorry. Just got to try and pin it up. Okay, greetings. I am GM of the Bolshevik Militant Tendency of Argentina, a member of the LCFI. We consider that in order to understand the war, oh my God, my chats. We understand. I'm sorry. Start again. My chat just keeps jumping around. Can someone else help me out? Alan, would you mind reading it from the chat for me?
Yeah. Greetings. I am GM of the Bolshevik Militant Tendency of Argentina, a member of the LCFI. We consider that in order to understand the war and the conflict between imperialism on one side and that of China and Russia on the other side, it is necessary to use Trotsky's method in the thesis of permanent revolution. In that sense, let us consider that it is necessary to use the method of permanent revolution to understand the current situation. What we consider central to the permanent revolution to understand today's dynamic is the conception that the pending bourgeois tasks can only be carried out with the methods of proletarian dictatorship. The bureaucratized proletarian dictatorship of the USSR overcame the pending tasks of backward Russia. I want to emphasize that for us from the LCFI, the cases of Russia and China for having been worker states advanced in the pending bourgeois tasks. That is why when they returned to capitalism, they did not return to the previous stage from 1917 or 1949. Rather, they returned with industrial development, energy sovereignty, nuclear independence, etc. That makes them something qualitatively different from the set of semi-colonies on the planet, nor are they imperialist countries. Therefore, the cases in which we are dealing with Russia and China have to be understood according to the interpretation of the permanent revolution of the 21st century. That is, as a byproduct of the cycle of proletarian revolutions of the 20th century that gave rise to the mega worker states of the Soviet Union and People's China. It should be clarified that this is more evident in the case of China. In Russia, with capitalist restoration, there was a strong setback in the 90s with Yeltsin, and under the shock doctrine, similar to the one that was opposed in Chile under the Pinochet dictatorship, and neoliberalism was founded. They dragged the USSR to a semi-colonial condition, or colonial for a decade. State planning had been abandoned and leading to the economic collapse of the country. But the setback was as brutal as the dialectical reaction of the Russian economy to defend itself from the deep robbery. And the former bureaucrats now turned into new bourgeois, aware of the Russian wealth, and that a little nationalization would allow them the logic of the capital accumulation at a higher level than Yeltsin's neoliberal neocolonialization propelled the Putin era. In a later period, the lived experience of the Soviet Union of having completed the pending bourgeois tasks led to the remnants of the workers' state, especially at the arms level, which allowed the Russian Federation to consolidate itself as a dependent country after 2000. In other words, qualitatively different from a semi-colony taking advantage of the advances of its heritage as a worker state at the nuclear, spatial, etc. level. For this reason, to defend itself from the robbery and the siege of Russia, the Russian capitalist economy defended itself by returning to certain elements of sovereignty conquered by, by the USSR, renationalizing the military, industrial, and energy complex, about a third of the economy, to keep a greater part of the Russian wealth and military power, which imperialism does not admit, and that is why it advances in the offensive and in the NATO encirclement of Russia.
All right, thank you. Thank you to our comrades, and thanks, Ellen.
Very much.
Thank you. We're working internationally here, and I think those of us who are native-born English speakers understand that in this forum, you know, it gives us, we're happy. Yeah, it's great to have non-English people from the non-English speaking world. So thank you for your persistence and efforts in making that possible, so we can be truly internationalist. All right, so thank you very much to everyone for joining. I think this was a really important meeting and a great start. So to this process. So just to sum it up, let's hope this is the start. Thank you for joining us today. Thanks for everyone who's watched. Workers of the world unite. Socialism or barbarism. No to war on Russia, and down with imperialism. Thank you, comrades. We'll all be speaking soon.
Thank you, comrades.
Thank you, comrades. Thank you, Alan, Jan, Robert, Jody, Greg, our comrades.
Thanks for organizing it.
Okay.
Thanks for organizing. Thanks.
Yeah, Davey, thank you. Thank you for all your work, and Umberto also. Can you hear me? No.
Yeah.
Probably not.
Yep. All right. Well, I'll end the meeting now, but we'll all speak soon.
Yeah, can I ask one question, Dave?
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Can you hear me? Yeah. Do you know if there are plans for other people can watch this at a later time?
Yeah, absolutely. So this will be uploaded to the Liga Comunista YouTube page, and we'll share the
YouTube
link around.
page. Okay, thank
And
you.
there's still, you can still watch it on the Facebook Live. You can watch later as well on the.
Okay, great, because I know there are people that would like to see it.
Yep, it'll definitely be available on.
And again, congratulations for all your work. It's
And
a lot of technical work. Thank you.
all right, no worries. Thank you, and thanks, Alberto. All right, okay, end the meeting now. Goodbye.
Okay, bye.